and welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Laura Dodd, the head book buyer at Forbidden Planet, and today I'm very, very excited to be joined by China Miéville to talk about the Book of Elsewhere. So, hi China, how's it going?
It's good, thank you so much for having me.
My God, yeah, had to make an early start today, but when Rachel messaged from Penguin saying, "Oh, China's free," I was just like,
yeah, well, thank you for being so flexible. I really appreciate it.
So we have to ask, and we've all been super excited about the Book of Elsewhere, how did this project come about?
It came about through an email. I got an email from my agent saying, Keanu Reeves is interested in doing a project with you.
How crazy!
Yeah, that was more or less what and so it emerged that he'd read several of my books and liked them, and he had this, as you know, he's done the BRZRKR comic, and he has this, I think, very interesting and quite generous way of relating to this world that he's created, where he's interested in collaborating with some of the people whose work he likes in other media. So so he works with comic writers that he likes. He's interested in and he had this idea for wanting to kind of do it as a novel, and so he was interested in working with a writer whose work he'd really got on with. So we sort of talked it over. We met, and it was very important, I think, to me to make sure that I was the right person to do it. So I had to kind of familiarize myself with the comic, and also figure out if there was, I thought, sort of interesting things that we could do with it in a novel form, because there's no point just replicating the comic. You've got to do something that's specific to the novel form, and then had to be clear that he was cool with that idea as well, and so on. So there was a process of very friendly sort of discussion and negotiations on, and when we realized that we thought we had a way forward that we were both excited about, it just kind of went from there. There's
definitely a certain, I suppose, synergy between you two, because when this was announced I was just like, oh, that totally makes sense.
It's funny because I can't judge, I'm too close to it, but secondhand, when the announcement was made, the two responses that I heard of were, yeah, it totally makes sense, and what the actual fuck. So, yeah, where you fall on that.
Yeah. It's a spectrum.
Indeed.
So were you, I know off camera you said obviously you are a geek. Were you familiar with the comics, or are you a big kind of comic reader yourself?
I am a comic reader. I'm not a collector. I'm not someone who assiduously keeps up with everything. Partly I just can't. It's too much. I grew up very much on comics, particularly kind of sort of underground comics and the kind of Fantagraphics and Raw, that kind of thing. But I also always, excuse me, had an interest in the big two and so on. And I did some work with DC some years ago, sort of rebooting an old title, Dial H for Hero, which I always loved. So I certainly do come out of comics. I was vaguely aware of the BRZRKR comic, but I hadn't read it. And so, as I say, one of the first things I did was read it and sort of try and map the kind of what felt to me like the core. Well, first of all, work out whether or not I got on with it, whether I enjoyed it, so which I did very much, and then sort of working out what the key sort of nodes of it were, and discussing with him what he thought the key nodes were and what we could sort of port over and how and that kind of thing. And
for you, because obviously the main character of BRZRKR is well, I mean, it's hard to kind of put into words. What was it about the character in particular that you think kind of spoke or resonated with you in any way?
I think, there's a certain melancholy to the character, which I always like that. There's a kind of something of a trope, I suppose, which comes out of I guess Don Quixote and so on, which is the kind of the knight of the doleful countenance, and I always like that shtick. He crops up again in the work of M. John Harrison, in Lewis Carroll, crops up all over the place, excuse me. And I liked that melancholy. And there's a complicated relationship to morality, whereby this character is by no means a goodie,
Yeah.
but nor is he, quote, evil, and nor is he amoral. He has a very strong sense of morality, but a complicated relationship to it, because if you're immortal, you can't relate to humans as the same kind of agents that you are. And then there was one of the things that was very exciting to me, and honestly kind of a surprise, was when I was talking to Keanu about it early on, it became clear that there were certain kind of very key aspects that he was really committed to about the character, the main character, and some of the other characters and so on. But he wasn't fixated on like canon and lore, Lore, in you know, and that was very liberating. So, you know, sometimes you see people sort of talk about this as a book set in the world of the comics, and I would say, well, let's call it a version. You know, like, so people, if you're one of those people, you know, spoken with love as a fellow geek, but like who gets very, very tight about kind of canonical lore continuity, then this could be interesting for you, because I'm not, you know, we're not guaranteeing that everything in the comics is in the books and vice versa. So probably best to think of this as part of the kind of Berserker multiverse rather than the Berserker universe. And that was really exciting, because it meant that like we could take over the key thing, this kind of melancholy, this kind of a kind of embeddedness in but distance from the world, and see about doing things that both were like Easter eggs for the comics and that were very true to the comic and that gave a lot of gifts to lovers of the comics, but that were also their own thing and that weren't like hamstrung within that. So and there's a tradition of the kind of the immortal, and for me the key figure in this is Melmoth the Wanderer, which was one of my mother's favourite books, and it's kind of this very sort of melodramatic gothic book, and there's a famous cover from I think the early 70s of this kind of immortal wandering with this kind of rictus of misery holding a human skull, and so that was kind of haunting me lovingly as I wrote this, but wanting to do a kind of quieter version of it. And I think one of the things that Keanu does a lot is this triangulation between kind of cool kick-ass violence, but this kind of melancholy and this kind of quiet, and that, you know, I was really interested in seeing what we could do with sort of you know, kind of moving between those two. And the last thing, sorry I keep going on, but the last thing is, again, because there's things you can do with a book that you can't do with a comic, or you can't do as well, I think, and vice versa. And one of the things that this felt to me like a real opportunity was to sort of have like narrative threads that were like throughout history, people who had encountered this figure. So rather than just narrowing in on him, and you start to see the way that this figure could kind of oscillate throughout history and the impact it has on other people. And that gave us an opportunity to kind of play with voice and with point of view and so on in a way that we thought was really interesting, and we hope readers do too.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, obviously, Melmoth the Wanderer, because I was kind of getting, well, I suppose, the thing of immortality, and kind of getting almost Blade vibes, in the sense that you have this character who has lived lifetimes and maybe not resorts to violence, but maybe violence is their only kind of answer. And obviously vampires are definitely having a bit of a renaissance
again.
At the moment. Again, they've come back. They just won't stay dead. They just won't stay dead. But it's quite interesting, because I suppose some of the vampire fiction that's coming out more recently is definitely very different to what we've seen before. It's not the kind of the Twilight glowing vampires, and it's not the kind of necessarily like, though huge fan of Anne Rice, but like there's obviously the sexual element to those vampires. These are definitely kind of more killing machines. So there's an amazing book called Nestlings by Nat Cassidy. And it's all based, this couple get the opportunity to live in like this amazing kind of apartment building. It's like you know, well, we finally managed to get into this apartment, and it has kind of vampires living in the rafters and stuff.
Okay. So this is a book about the housing crisis.
Yes, with
Okay.
vampires. Yeah.
So a book about the housing crisis.
Yeah, a book about. So yeah, we have to kind of. What's quite interesting, the kind of idea of anger, especially, and kind of, I suppose, looking at what's happening in the wider world,
Yeah.
and especially obviously political crisis of the moment. Well, not just of the moment, I suppose. How important, kind of, for you? I know obviously you've been very vocal about your kind of ideas of communism and kind of, you know, changing the structure and kind of, I suppose, giving back or giving more power to the people. Does that affect your writing, and has that kind of come into this book at all?
I mean, it certainly affects the writing but not, I mean, in the sense that everything I'm interested in and everything about the way I approach the world affects everything else I'm interested in. And if that sounds like an evasive answer, it's really not meant to be, because I think sometimes there is this notion that, like, if you're someone who has a particular political commitment, that therefore, like, everything you write, what you're trying to do is work at it, and it just doesn't work that way. But it's also, at least not for me, but it's also not a question of, like, trying to hide anything. It's just, you know, I'm interested in the way societies work, I'm interested in the way cultures work, so inevitably that's going to find its way into the stuff I write. And hopefully what that does is it makes for a kind of a rich sort of texture of description of society, of kind of setting and so on. I mean, I've said many times before, if I want to make a political argument, I'll just do so. I do so. So if you were trying to convert people to a particular political viewpoint, then, you know, a novel about an 80,000-year-old immortal warrior would be a really foolish way to try to do it, you know. But sure, like, you know, if you're interested in the kind of things I'm interested in, then you'll doubtless see some texture in there. But this is an interesting one for that kind of thing, because this is a collaborative novel. So you will also find a lot of stuff that comes from Keanu's approach to things, and the way I was approaching this when it sort of came across my desk was the idea of playing with someone else's toys. These are ultimately his toys, and I say that without, not just without resentment, but like with delight, in the sense that, like, sometimes when you're a kid, some of the best games you can play are with someone else's toys, because there's a certain freedom to that, and, you know, and you want to be kind of respectful of, like, you know, their rules, you know, but you're bringing a new perspective, so you can do new things to it and so on. So you know, so in terms of your question, I mean, you know, he's a very smart guy. He, I'm sure, has a sense of, like, you know, some of the things that I'm bringing. He's read my books. And the texture that I'm talking about, that my concerns, including political concerns, I guess, bring to something, clearly worked for him as a reader, and that was some of the aspects that he wanted in it. Yeah,
definitely. And I think the great thing about this book and projects like it is that it's not only opening the world up to people who read books who may not read comics, because there's definitely a bit of a divide between, you know, if you speak to someone and they're like, what do you read? Oh, I read manga, say, then you sometimes get kind of looked down upon in a way, which is totally unfair, because, hey, you know, you find love of reading wherever you find it. But the fact that you're kind of opening doors for people who may not be familiar with the Berserker comics, or those comic readers who are just like, hey, I'm going to pick up a book.
Yeah, and it was one of the things that we were both very keen on right away, and also, you know, our editor Ben Greenberg was very, very specific about, and I completely was on board, was that, like, this has to stand alone. Like, we're very Ben, when he was writing a kind of introduction for this, when the arcs went out, the introduction said something like, you know, do you like the Berserker comics? Great, you'll love this book. Have you not heard of them before? Great, you'll love this book. Like, the idea that this book has to stand on its own. So if you come to it with, and partly that was one of the reasons that I was very interested in having a respectful but not sort of slavish relationship to the comic canon. So if you come to this and you've read the comics, you're certainly going to be like, oh, okay, there's so and so, there's so and so, and this is what they've done with so and so and so and so. But equally, if you don't, hopefully the book will completely stand alone, and maybe will provoke a few people to go and read the comics and so on. I mean, I think what I am keen to say, as I've mentioned before, is that like different forms do different things in different ways. So I think what would be a shame would be if someone said, well, you know, I read the comic and I liked it in this very specific way, so I'm now going to read this book, and if it doesn't hit me in exactly the same way, the book has failed. It's like, then there's no point in it being a book. Like, this has to be able to do something specific and new, complementary, but different. And to that extent, I'm very hopeful that the book surprises people. Like, there's a certain promise when you write within a genre, or within a in this case, for example, if you're writing a book that is clearly part of a multiverse, like there are certain things that you come to the Berserker canon for, and it would be if you like, a breach of promise not to get, like, you know, there's a helicopter chase, there's ultra violence, there's, you know, like, don't worry. But the intention is to say, well, but maybe there's also some stuff that you really weren't expecting, that you really that doesn't do with those things what you necessarily thought it would. So that's the attempt that we're, I think, hoping for.
Yes. And there's apparently talk of a kind of Netflix adaptation for the Berserker novels and stuff. I can imagine that that's going to look amazing.
Again, I mean, as far as I know nothing about that, but that would be, I think, one of, you know, Keanu's very interested, as I say, in trying to do as many different versions of this as possible. And one of the things that I really, I know this sounds very kind of schmoozy, but I wholeheartedly and sincerely really respect about the way he does this, is that he's like, here are people doing work that I'm interested in various fields. How can we, you know, let's bring them in to do this thing that they do well, this thing that they do well. So I think my assumption, and it is only an assumption, I don't know, but my assumption would be that the relationship to any movie or anything, and who knows, an animation, a video game or whatever, would be very much like, let's get the person who's working in that field, let's give them as much freedom as possible within the constraints of a kind of multiverse, you know, and so that you get to do, so in the same way as what I'm saying about the book, like, the video game isn't just, you know, a point for point replication of the comic, and the movie isn't just a point for point replication. So I would look forward to seeing those things, precisely to see both what they share and how they differ.
Yes, yeah. And I think there seems to be definitely more, just thinking of things like Elden Ring, and obviously George R. R. Martin being involved in the writing of Elden Ring. Have you ever considered kind of, or have you done any work in other spheres like gaming or?
I'm interested in gaming, and I'm a very, very bad gamer. And I don't really game. I mean, I got quite into the Diablo franchise, and that kind of isometric, like first person shooters I can't do at all. I have a philosophical objection to first person shooters in terms of the point of view, not the political stuff, obviously, you know, mass murder, etc. But we're talking about video games here, but like, you know, third person, when you have like shoulder camera, I think that's philosophically more honorable than a first person thing. So but this is also all a way of glossing the fact that I'm a 51-year-old man with poor reflexes who did not grow up on these things. So like, I played, is it called The Last Guardian? Is that the name of it? You know the one I mean, the really beautiful arty thing. And I thought it was exquisite and beautiful, and like, as works of art. I mean, I can't believe we're still having this debate, like, is it art, blah, blah, blah. That's ridiculous. But as a player, I suck. And so I don't come at video game. I come at video games as someone who's very interested in like world creation and aesthetics and so on. And I would love to, you know, to work around that. I think that's really interesting. But you know, it's not a field I know particularly well. Yeah.
Well, it's never too late to get.
The older I get, the later it feels. But we'll see. We'll see. Yeah.
So I suppose the term kind of weird fiction definitely obviously applies to a lot of your backlist. How do you think weird fiction has changed in more recent years and with the pandemic? And is there kind of any other authors writing in that space who you particularly enjoy reading?
I mean, one of the things that's been really fascinating to me is the sort of immense expansion of the weird as a way into thinking about things. Because when I started writing, I mean, you know, certainly if you were part of, you know, if you were in kind of geek culture and had been aware of things like weird tales and so on, you knew this term and so on. But the idea that you would have like major exhibitions at the British Library with a whole room on the weird, or that you would have like academic conferences on like the weird as affect and all this kind of thing, like inconceivable. And I find that, I would say 85% I find that really exciting. 15% I roll my eyes, because that also always comes with an element of domestication and commodification and so on. So but that's inevitable. I'm not being a hater. That's just one of the things that happens when particular cultural bits and pieces get picked up. And I do think it's a really interesting field of inquiry. So I'm overwhelmingly sort of excited and positive about this. I'm not really, I can't really speak to sort of kind of really recent changes and sort of developments, because I just can't keep up. I can't keep up with everything going on. So I tend to be someone who reads things a few years after they come out. So I'm always, but yeah, I mean, of course, so I'm that guy who's like, you know, oh yes, wasn't that you know, like, and I was like, yeah, you know. So I didn't steep myself in that during the pandemic. For example, I was reading very different things, lots of non-fiction and so on. There are plenty of writers writing today within a sort of broad remit of the weird that I like very much. Two people whose work I've been really impressed with and interested in. One is Jenny Hval, I'm probably mispronouncing that, Hval, who wrote a very strange book novel called Paradise Rot, which is very beautiful, very strange, kind of a cross-fertilization of the weird and kind of sort of dissident philosophy. It's a really interesting book. I'm also a very long-term lover of the work of Michael Sisko, who I think is kind of the outstanding writer of the weird and so on today. Quite a challenging writer, but in a way that I think is deeply exciting for readers. And everything he writes is fantastic, but my favourite remains a book called The Narrator, which he wrote some years ago now, but I think is just an absolutely remarkable book. So those are two names that come to mind. Okay.
And to kind of round off the interview today, because obviously we've got a few books for you to sign as well before you disappear. What is the rest of the kind of timetable looking like for the Book of Elsewhere? So I think you and Keanu are doing a virtual event?
Yeah, we're doing a virtual event in July, I think, and doing a few more interviews and so on. This will probably come as a big shock to you, but he's quite busy. So
he's got a band and everything.
He's and he has this little side gig acting. A little side hustle. So I don't know. I mean, we're squeezing. So we tend to be doing like a few intense days rather than like spread out over a long time, which I think is more effective actually myself anyway. So
you can really get to know someone when you've got 48 hours to get all of this done. So
it sounds like the beginning of a buddy movie.
It does, and what a buddy movie that would be. Amazing.
He plays by the rules. He doesn't, etc.
And to finish off, obviously we touched on a few books already, but is there anything you're currently watching or looking forward to watch, film or TV wise, and anything you're particularly looking forward to reading later this year?
I'm really bad at answering this question about anything that's coming up, simply because, as I've said, I'm always behind the curve generally, and so I tend to be reading and catching up with things sometime later. So I have to sort of I have to apologise for that because I'm hopeless about kind of keeping my finger on the pulse of what's really happening. So I can mention, for example, stuff that came out a little while ago that I haven't yet seen, and so for example, I still haven't got it together to watch Skinamarink, which I am the kind of, you know, arty horror film which I have heard only very good things about. Haven't seen it yet, just because I haven't got it together. So when I have a time to really get into that headspace, I'm very much looking forward to that. As regards reading, this is probably not the answer that you maybe want. I'm reading a lot of poetry at the moment, and that's a really new thing for me. So I'm kind of going back. Again, this is in terms of things coming out this year, no, but I'm reading, you know, trying to read sort of poets like Verity Spot and Emily Critchley, and also going back to the kind of 80s and 90s and reading some kind of very important anthologies that I had somehow missed. So as I say, I tend to be behind the times. That is mostly the sort of stuff that I've been really diving into at the moment, as well as all the non-fiction that we have to read to keep up with the nightmare that is the world.
Yes. I still need to watch that film as well, but I did do the 7-day free trial with Shudder. I was just trying to like watch as much as I could in my 7 days, so it's just like another horror, come on.
But Shudder's great.
Oh my god, there's so much good, very good stuff. There's an amazing and now I'm gonna blank, there's an amazing Australian horror I watched, Lake Mungo. I
love that film. It's such a beautiful film. Have you seen it?
Good.
It's exquisite.
Oh my god.
It's one of my classic go-tos for people who think they don't like horror films.
Yes.
It's such a lovely film, and so smart about grief, and I completely agree.
Oh my, yeah. There was such a quietness to it, which I like, those kind of films that it makes you pay attention even though it's so quiet.
Yeah, and it forces its own pace. It's very measured.
Yeah.
And any time a horror film, just like I got nothing in principle against a jump scare, but you need to earn it.
Yes.
And it's very, you know, and when you have a horror film that essentially has the kind of that either abjures jump scares altogether, or that like really earns like one or something, it's a very cool, classy move, I think. Definitely. That's such a good film. And then I think we watched Infested the day after, which is a very different horror film. Is that the one about spiders?
Yeah, it's
French.
It's French. Yeah.
Is it good?
Yeah. It's very good, very different kind of.
Yeah, I have that on my list, and I do like a spider movie. I mean, I love arachnophobia, obviously. And there's this new one, Sting, which I haven't seen yet, which is Australian.
That also looks amazing.
I do love a good creature feature, and I haven't seen the. And I'm completely uninterested in the kind of Kong Skull Monsterverse stuff, because it's all about kind of bombast and spectacle in this rather flat way for my taste. But a good sort of gnarly creature feature. I really quite, to my great surprise, I enjoyed the recent Evil Dead.
Yes, and I wasn't expecting much. You know, like sometimes when you just say, they're coming back to the well, and is there more to kind of give? But
yeah. Generally, I think that, you know, most franchises should stop much earlier than they do. But that one really surprised me. I thought it managed to walk that line of like being fun and playing and having just enough fan service, but actually also doing something new and not doing the kind of comedy at the expense of the horror, which because generally comedy horror for me not a thing, but I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
No, that's we could sit and talk about horror films all day long.
I would be really happy to. Absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, well, for everyone out there watching, we will have signed copies of the Book of Elsewhere landing very, very soon. So pre-order now or head into any of our stores to grab a copy, or you can grab one of China's varied and huge backlist of signed books that will be going out very, very soon. But yes, we will see you next time on Forbidden Planet TV. Bye.
Thanks for having me.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.